Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to sleep. Sleep has eluded me for several days at this point, but to sleep is to give up and let guilt destroy me. That's what I call it anyway, guilt. It was as plausible an explanation as any to describe the feeling in the pit of my stomach, this schizophrenic nightmare that eats at me day in and day out. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. I should use this last bit of sanity I have left and write what I know before I get dropped back in with the chance of losing grip on reality. Because at some point, I'll beat myself at my own game and that'll be the end of me. I've been staring at this white wall for 7 hours now, awake for the moment. I know this because I've been keeping track. I see each second pass by me, the wristwatch's second hand slowly ticking. Time is both a blessing and a curse. Everyone dreams, right? At least that's what I assume. You dream about all sorts of things. Good. Bad. Otherwise. This seems to be common with other people. I can't be the only one. But they're always just that. A dream. A brief fantasy of the unconscious mind. It shouldn't be able to harm you. Only now and then does the concept of dreaming ever manage to seep into what we typically think of as a shared reality in our conscious state. Drug-induced hallucinations seem to be a common shared one amongst people, as do concepts such as sensory deprivation tanks and the like, seeking to allow the mind to run wild and create its own visual worlds. Time? I'm looking down at my watch again. Another minute ticking past. Time is that which escapes my grip every time I fall asleep. But I'm getting ahead of myself. And one common trait of dreamers may be better known by the general public, but seems to affect only those who don't sleep lightly, much like myself. That's sleep paralysis. And the monstrous figures who hover between the depths of your mind and your bedroom walls. It's commonly understood amongst the general populace, and only some understand the sheer terror that strikes you when your eyes are closed. Yet your mind is on, and it can see the red eyes that hover in your face, judging you. The dreams began a while back, several years ago, I assume, at this point. The exact amount of time isn't clear to me anymore. It had been innocent enough. I fell asleep to the sounds of another YouTuber screaming at the sounds of the horror game of the week. I used to enjoy the genre, an avid fan of video games myself, but I can't stand them anymore. I keep derailing from staying on topic. I need to type this before my eyes give way to this shit again. Someone needs to know. I had fallen asleep, hard into the world of fantasy. No one ever seems to characterize dreams the way I experience them. They're devoid of details, with gray masses of nothingness depicting the boundaries that trail into the distance, endlessly. Like the edge of a map in a video game, but fuzzier and far less outline. The dreams always begin with me studying something. A door, a signpost, a horizon from the top of a deck. It didn't matter much, though. A robot factory, a school, an island dictatorship. They all ended the same. Something would find me. I was never sure what it would be or how it would hurt me, but I knew I had to run far. My feet have never carried me anywhere in a dream, though. I would run hard in any direction, but my feet would ache severely, and I'd ultimately be running on what felt like a conveyor belt. And these abominations would catch me. A man in a bowler hat, his smug face was nearing as he floated to me. A robot out of a childhood video game, glowing red eyes, and a laser gun cocked and aimed at me. A sea of sludge and various dead animals inside. Not too unlike a childhood trip to La Brea Tar Pits in Los Angeles. I remember an alien abducting me in my bedroom when I was tiny. But as with a dream, you can't die. The fear is entirely irrational, and it makes no sense. There's no physical object to harm you. So, why do you run? Why did I run? What was the point? Whenever any would almost catch me, it'd fade to black. A black slate gray mass took over my mind and sent me back into a normal, dreamless slumber. I always assumed death to be a similar sensation. Sometimes I run at the monsters to make them leave. They always get me, but at least the dream is shorter. Facing the fear head-on seemed to help. That night was different, though. The typical dream had begun with a view of a trippy, colorful world, not unlike that of LSD Dream Emulator, one of the few games ever to capture the actual feel of dreaming, in my opinion. The world was laid out in front of me as splotches of jittery color splashed across the landscape. I realized I was in for my usual night of terror quite quickly and decided to attempt to end the dream immediately. And when a dreamer realizes they've begun to dream within the dream, or to lucid dream as it's referred to, the reality of the dream can shift drastically in seconds. Your unconscious mind doesn't like to be questioned. I raced up to the railing in front of me, my feet barely carrying me close enough, even as I sprinted. I took a running dive off the balcony into the colorful abyss, hoping to end the nightmare before it truly began. The air raced up to greet me, and a mass of gray began to spread across the color. The end of the dream nearing ever so closer. Ending a dream by jumping from a high place seems to have always been an effective way to end it on a dime. There's something about the shock of adrenaline or something to that akin. Something stopped me that night, though. I hit the rainbow-colored ground with a slight thud, uncharacteristic of the feeling you usually get from falling through a dream. The ground was still shimmering with color, but it was oddly still. I looked to my left. However, I wasn't in my body anymore. That was a relatively normal occurrence, though. You'd see yourself in the third person, but still be in control of your actions. It made the dream an almost cinematic experience. There was a gray figure standing in the distance. I couldn't quite make out much of it, though it had a pair of red, glowing eyes. I debated running, but realized this was what kept this dream from ending prematurely. So I sprinted towards it. I ran towards the figure, but made no progress. But it floated over to me, slowly, understanding my want to come near it. The red glowing eyes dimmed down, and I could see the red reflected in a pair of realistic eyes. The figure was definitely me. It was myself in the dream, or a character using my body anyway. I tried to fling myself at it, but the figure floated back, dodging. I understand that you wish to end this dream. It had spoken to me in my voice. You're not real. Why don't we shatter this reality and move on? I looked at the figure, watching the unblinking neutral stare. It considered the request. No, I don't think I will let you today. What gives you the right to choose? You're not even real. You're just me. I might just be you, but I assure you, I'm real. The figure turned and looked out into the gray mass. Emptiness is a terrifying prospect, is it not? The gray figure stood tall and stared out into the abyss. Damn you! Come over here so I can end this dream! I reached forward, but the figure vanished. I was stuck in a colorful pit, the gray mass far off from me. Nothingness would have been a comfort to me at that moment. The figure eventually returned to me, but it felt like hours. Days, even. Dreams aren't supposed to feel like that. I could feel its presence behind me, watching me search endlessly in the void. Do you understand why I let you wander endlessly? The figure stated. You're sick. Do you know that? You're sick. If I'm you, and you call me sick, what does that say about you? I angrily rushed the figure, clawing my way towards it. It kept moving away from me faster and faster. My legs burned and cramped. I was barely keeping pace with the figure. I ran as hard as I could, trying to capture it, knowing it was my ticket out of there. I leaped at myself and grabbed it. The gray mass engulfed me, and I thought I had woken up. I was in my bedroom, staring up at the ceiling. A cold sweat across my forehead. My legs burned. The pain of running a marathon in a minute. All too real. Way too real. I looked up at the ceiling. It made me freeze. The ceiling was transparent, and above the roof was a huge, floating head. My head. It stared down at me. A grin plastered across its face. I was frozen in place, except for my eyes. They jittered, trying to make out the details of the head. My mind couldn't comprehend the sight. It slowly moved through the ceiling, closer to me. I struggled to move, but paralysis had taken hold of me. I hurriedly began to hyperventilate, wishing I hadn't slept on my arms, numb from the lack of blood circulation. The increase in oxygen made everything fuzzier as the head was right up in my face now, screaming. I awoke in reality that time. A nasty nightmare, but one that was at least over. I sighed in relief, my anxiety causing my heart to beat out of my chest. I attempted to sit up, but it didn't feel right. My legs hurt. I looked down at my calves, and they were black and blue. My arms were red and bruised as well. And I felt pain in my left ankle like it had snapped in two. I grabbed my phone by the side of the bed and read the time. 11 a.m. I had wasted the morning of that Saturday fighting nightmare creatures. At least I could get them, throw some food in the microwave and forget about this. That's when I saw the date below. It made me freeze. It wasn't Saturday. It was Sunday. There was a text from my friend waiting for me in the notification bubble. "Dude, where are you? You never showed up at the party last night." I texted back, "What party? I thought that was tonight." "You missed it, man. It was pretty great. Were you up smoking weed again or something?" I had set the phone down. Had I taken anything before bed? I didn't think I had. It had been like any other night at my house, boring, predictable, and filled with an unhealthy amount of electronic usage before bed. I assumed it was nothing the first time, a fluke of odd sleep patterns. But I was wrong. This dream has been repeated over and over again, subtle variations leading to the same result. Sometimes I was underwater, the dreamscape cold and uncaring. I'd wake up covered in sweat or hives or rashes. One time I broke a bone trying to capture the figure. It got smarter each time the dream happened. My victories against it getting closer and closer. Every dream, the amount of time grows dramatically and the difficulty in escaping increases. The first time, it was only one day lost. The last time, I spent 6 months trapped in my head. I'll never get back that time in the real world. My friends have all but abandoned me, assuming I'm some insane basket case that can't be cured. But they don't understand, and I hope they don't ever have to. This is going to continue. I'm exhausted as I write this. I can't leave my head anymore. Even when I'm awake, my anxiety pounds me with the thought that I'll be asleep again soon. And this time, I may not come back. I can't take this anymore. I'm sorry I killed her. I repent. I concede. I give up. Please give me the courage to die. This reality pains me. I can't handle it anymore. I can't take it. I can't. Let me go. I beg you, if you're reading this, let me die.
I'm late. I'm late for a very important date. No time to say hello, goodbye. I'm late. The White Rabbit from Alice in Wonderland. Late! Thought Brian as he sped from his third-floor apartment. He pressed the down button at least 20 times, as if the 23rd try might be the charm. Once in the elevator, he quickly pushed the button for the lobby. He started jabbing the button with violent intent when the elevator doors wouldn't close immediately, the way they do on those science fiction shows. The elevator became a trampoline as he jumped up and down on the floor. Finally, after what seemed to him like an eternity, the doors opened so slowly that they seemed to be outright sadistic. Brian erupted onto the sidewalk that was filled with the daily parade of the white-collared undead. He then started power-walking at the pace of an outright jog. He preferred to walk to his office. Buses were too slow, and hailing cabs in New York City was a hit-and-miss proposition. Shortly after moving to his posh Manhattan apartment, Brian had planned out the quickest and most direct route to the Miser Building. It was where the prestigious company of Tyler, Milford, and Drake had made their executives rich and happy by making select clients even richer and happier. There, Brian was hailed as one of the most gifted efficiency experts on the East Coast. He was hired on April 11, 1991, by Walter Schimmel, the director of human resources. He'd quickly ascended the corporate ladder to a staggering height, where he handled all the essential and lucrative clients. Brian remembered every number, person, and place with impressive detail. And so it was just another day when the prospective new client strode curtly into Brian's nicely appointed office. Being very detail-oriented himself, Brian was impressed with the man's outward appearance. He wore a neatly pressed black suit with creases so sharp that you could use them to slice salami. His simple but tasteful necktie was expertly nestled into the crisp collar of a brilliantly white shirt. His matching black Italian shoes were polished to perfection. His hair was expertly sculpted to a handsome face that exuded intelligence, sophistication, and confidence. His posture was ramrod straight. His gaze was intense, but not threatening. After cordially introducing himself, Brian offered him a chair, but the man declined by saying, "Let's see what happens next before I take a seat." The curious visitor introduced himself as Nealon Murphy. He said only that he operated an expansive company that had dealt with countless clients from all walks of life for many years. He added that his company had expanded to such a degree as to require a good bit of creative and efficient reorganization. He went on to speak of Brian's well-known reputation for meticulous planning and dispassionate decision-making. But he said Brian's penchant for achieving results with precise punctuality and well-reasoned forethought impressed him the most. He then offered a challenge to Brian. "If you can demonstrate for me that you can deliver a project exactly on time at an agreed-upon location, I can assure you we will be doing business together for a very, very long time. You, Brian, will be my guy." Although Brian was a tad uneasy by the man's reluctance to share any more details about his business, especially its name, he was excited at the prospect of putting his skills and reputation on the line to win a challenge successfully. Why, it would become the stuff of corporate legend. "Let's hear the challenge," Brian said eagerly. "The rules are quite easy to understand. It's the finish line that will be nearly impossible to cross. Oh, I think you might be surprised, if not astonished, by my unique skill set. All right, then. Are you familiar with the Lower East Side of Manhattan?" "Know it like the lines on my face," bragged Brian. "Ooh," cooed Murphy. "I'm impressed with you already. Some people might think of your statement as arrogant at best, or foolhardy at worst. I think we'll just call it moxie. Okay, then?" The man said as he walked around and surveyed the two chairs in front of Brian's dark mahogany desk. Once he selected his favorite, he sat down. Murphy casually crossed his legs and then pulled and straightened the left cuff of his trousers. He allowed a short moment to pass before he spoke, as if he was carefully choosing the most cogent and succinct way of explaining his directions. He slowly reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and extracted a small cream-colored envelope about the size of an invitation that would come in. "Is that invite for me?" joked Brian. "Yes, I suppose it is," Murphy said with a slight laugh. "If you can meet my expectations, that is." "I'm listening," Brian responded. "Very good," Murphy said as he abruptly sprang from his chair and began purposefully pacing back and forth a few feet from Brian's desk. "I want you to deliver this envelope to me at a building located at 104 Beaumont Street at precisely 11:09 a.m. on Tuesday, May 11th of this year. That's 3 weeks from today. If you're not standing directly in front of that building with this important missive at exactly, and I mean exactly that moment, you will have failed this assignment. If that's the case, then I'll have to move on to a more talented and ambitious individual. And you'll wonder, for who knows how many years, when or if you'll ever have this opportunity again." Brian tried not to let his face reveal the massive doubt that had broken off a small crumb of his bravado. "As they say on the awards show, the envelope, please," Brian said as he leaned forward over his desk to take possession of the envelope. Despite demonstrating some theatrical flair, Murphy slowly and stiffly extended the hand where he held the small envelope between two beautifully manicured fingers. Brian, too, paused for a few seconds with an equal amount of dramatic panache before gingerly pulling it from Murphy's outstretched hand. Then Murphy smiled, turned, and began heading for the two large hand-carved wooden doors of Brian's spacious office. Just before Murphy made his exit, Brian asked loudly, "So, to who do I give the envelope, or do I just leave it somewhere?" "Neither," said Murphy. "You open it and read it when you arrive, and not before. The final and the most important directive will be printed on the card inside. Follow it. Don't follow. That's up to you. The main thing is that you're where you've been instructed to be when I've instructed you to be there with that item," he said, pointing to the small envelope that Brian held. "Do you remember the terms of our agreement? Be directly in front of the building at 104 Beaumont Street on Tuesday, May 11th of this year, at precisely 11:09 a.m. with this delivery. No earlier, no later. Got it. In the vault." Brian beamed as he pointed to his brain. "Outstanding. Oh, one more thing. And this is, of course, is entirely your decision. You might want to keep this little test of your acumen to yourself rather than bragging to your colleagues. After all, what might they think of you and your inability to meet an important deadline on the off chance you fail? Food for thought. Food for thought. I'll see you soon. Oh, and just for the record, I'm hoping you pull this off. I so want to be impressed. I can't tell you how amazing it would be to have a man with your highly pronounced abilities on board. Good day, Brian, and good luck." After Murphy left, Brian immediately began to map out his necessary departure time, the most efficient and barrier-free route, and his must-meet arrival time. This task would represent the culmination of all he had learned from childhood through college and his years as a practiced and accomplished professional. He felt more excited and exhilarated about the job than he'd been in a long time. For him, it was the challenge of it all. He still remembered the mantra his father had taught him as a boy. Early is on time is late, and late is, why'd you even bother coming in the first place? Except for this time, that old adage wouldn't be helpful. He couldn't be early, he couldn't be late. He had to be there on time, down to the absolute nanosecond. What was it? 11:09 a.m.? Not 11:08 or 11:10. It was an exact time in a specific place. Up until the morning of the delivery, he'd get up around 5 a.m. With a stopwatch in hand, he'd stand in front of his office building and walk the route while timing it. He repeated this ritual 3 times before heading to work each day. It took him more than 24 tries before he figured out the exact speed that he had to walk to arrive at the agreed-upon time. He was more than a bit doubtful at first. When the day of delivery came, he took some time to relax, and so his anxiety and adrenaline wouldn't force him to lose focus or to move too quickly. Ready, set, go, thought Brian as he leapt off the lowest step of the building where Tyler, Milford, and Drake were housed. He walked at the prescribed place he embedded in his brain to the point of muscle memory. He followed his road down sidewalks and alleyways with commitment, determination, and focus. Now there were only 2 blocks to go. Keep at this pace. From this point, it should take you 47 steps before you reach the doorway of the flower shop, Brian's mental coach reminded him. It's been said that men plan and God laughs. Such was Brian's misfortune when, just before reaching the flower shop, a couple walked out unexpectedly. Brian couldn't avoid the collision. The man was pushed back a little, but the woman with him lost her balance and fell down. Brian himself had nearly tripped over her. The man started yelling at Brian, but all that Brian's mind could register was, "Crap! Why'd this happen now?" "You idiot!" screamed the man. "How long has it been since I hit them? Sue you for everything." "Relax and check your stopwatch. Where the heck do you think you're going?" Brian had to do some quick calculations. "I know I should step up onto the curb at 14th Street at 11:07. I'll jog over there and wait on the curb until my stopwatch shows that time," he thought. Once back on schedule, Brian's mind began to slow down and relax, but the calm dissipated as soon as it occurred to him that he couldn't remember if he'd put the envelope in his coat pocket before leaving for the office. He was passing landmarks on his road at precisely the right time, so stopping to check for it would only complicate things. He made the decision to keep walking while checking his pockets for the envelope. His mind was racing and panicked as he hoped he was sticking to his well-timed pace while simultaneously clawing through his coat. It turned out that Lady Luck was one sweet mama, because Brian finally found the irksome envelope. He clutched it tightly in a white-knuckled death grip. Brian could hear his heartbeat in his ears as he spotted the building about 50 yards ahead. He hadn't eaten any breakfast due to his nerves, and now he was feeling a tad queasy and lightheaded. His mind started becoming both friend and foe. 30 yards. What if I don't make it? 10 yards. What if I do? 6 feet. Look at the watch. 3 steps. 11:09. I made it! Brian yelled out loud. Whew! Brian exhaled. He glanced down and realized he still had the envelope and promptly started ripping it open. "So," Brian said through a cocky smile, "where am I going, you pompous jerk?" Inside the envelope was a thick card that simply read, "Congratulations. Now join me over here to discuss your future." As the half-ton girder dropped directly on top of him, Brian's smile became a wide-open mouth of stupid confusion. Traffic screeched to a stop. People screamed and gawked at the pulverized sidewalk in front of 104 Beaumont, where a man of impeccable timing and execution had just stood triumphantly. Across the street, Brian was confounded and afraid as he inexplicably appeared beside a handsome gentleman in a perfectly tailored black suit. Murphy smiled as he continued to stare at the mad and grisly scene across the street. "Wow, I am impressed. You were right on the mark. You know, some people disparage the perpetually tardy by saying they'll be late for their own funerals. But not you, my friend. You, sir, are truly the man. I'm glad you accepted the invitation to join my company. I told you we were growing. What you there to help with our ongoing expansion, I'm confident we'll be able to service the many for a very, very long time to come. Murphy grinned with satisfaction as he placed his arm around Brian's slumped and trembling shoulders. And then they were gone.
Chapter 1. The Beginning. Loretta could see two versions of the mockingbird in the tree outside her window, one with ugly gray and black feathers, the other with beautiful aqua feathers. The aqua bird was so much more pleasing to Loretta's sight. The black and gray mockingbird always landed first in the newly blossomed redbud tree. The black and gray bird seemed cold and insensitive, unable to know beauty. The aqua bird would always arrive and chase the gray bird away, puffing its chest out in pride.
It's me,
Loretta said to herself.
I'm the pretty bird.
Her friends would sometimes scoff at her words. Whether she was actually the gray bird or the pretty aqua bird depended on the mood she was in that day. Loretta's emerald green eyes saw the very best of herself, the aqua bird, if you will. But there were times when her eyes turned a stone-cold gray, and she actually saw herself as the ugly gray and black feathered bird. She shook her head violently when she wanted it to go away, flailing her arms at the bird until she scared it off the beautiful branches. Loretta had always appeared confused about which color bird she was, even as a child growing up in the Missouri Ozarks. Loretta and her family, if that's what you called it, lived in a trailer with a couch in front. The couch sat in the front yard grass, which was worn and never mowed. Most of the grass was dead from the summer heat. The couch sat a few feet in front of the concrete block steps that led inside the trailer. Some of the windows were broken, and the siding was moldy all along the north side. Loretta's mother would scream, and her father would yell, making Loretta cover her ears. Loretta would sing nursery rhymes until her fear went away, kicking her feet outward, sometimes so fast and violent she did not realize she was bruising her heels against the front of the couch. Her brain spoke to her in words so fast and furious they made no sense. Loretta cried at first, but after a while, she no longer possessed tears to give. She felt her mind split into two parts. She felt she became two people. One person was helpful, nice, and caring. That was the aqua bird. The other, well, she just denied the other person existed. It was rage and fury taking her to a new dimension, a dimension with no memory, one in which she could never recall her violent fury. That's when she was the black and gray feathered bird. It was the hitting that made Loretta really turn into the black and gray bird. Her father, Jimmy, liked bullying her mother. She would just go outside and sit on the couch, kicking her heels against its base until they were bruised, singing her repetitive rhymes. She was walking home one day at 16 and found a boy while hitchhiking on the road. He was older and stopped his pickup truck to ask her if she needed a ride. She climbed into his truck that day and never looked back at her parents' trailer she had once called home, or hell. The boy's name was Jeb, and she would soon fall in love with him. He was kind and gentle to her, never yelling like her father or screaming like her mother. She was happy, and that is when the aqua bird began to appear to her. She could see it clearly at least once every day, mostly in the morning when she looked outside at the redbuds, waking up with Jeb by her side in their current trailer in an old rundown park in rural Missouri. Her parents never tried to find her once she left. Loretta was out on her own, learning things a girl her age was actually too young to learn. She grew up much too fast. Sometimes Jeb would take care of kids, lost like them, trying to survive in the world. They were kids whose parents never came home and left them all alone to fend for themselves. Jeb gave Loretta a place to stay. There was no yelling or screaming. Jeb never yelled at Loretta. It was not always warm or cool enough, but they did have shelter. Many times they would find old abandoned places to stay until someone found them and they fled. Life on the road Jeb stole food. He hunted food. He did whatever he could to help the both of them survive. Sometimes they would move into an abandoned trailer in an old park that no one owned anymore, but mostly they found ones that were abandoned in empty fields or sparse woods. Sometimes they ate at food kitchens for the homeless, or others would give them money to eat. That is, if they weren't on the run. They seemed to be able to avoid the authorities many times for the evil they left behind them. Although it wasn't real, the Aqua bird was to Loretta. It calmed her after her episodes of anger and evil. As times passed, she engaged in many more angry episodes, but Jeb was always there to direct her anger in the direction of what he called righteous behavior, to use her sparks of anger for good. "Well, you know, people like us, we are only helping the children, you know," Jeb would say.
But Jeb, they'll find us someday. They'll hurt us.
"No, they won't, Loretta. I won't ever let them hurt you. Besides, what we did was not wrong. It freed children from those terrible people." Even though Jeb was kind to Loretta, he could be evil to others. He was evil to others because he grew up like Loretta. He lived in the same kinds of places with the same kinds of parents. He promised himself that he would help anyone with parents like his and Loretta's. Jeb always lived with a mean streak, one that cost Jeb's own father his life. Jeb's father came home drunk one afternoon. Jeb was supposed to have the work done. His father barreled through the door of the trailer, pushing Jeb's mother to the floor. He took off his belt and was going to teach Jeb a lesson for being lazy and not getting the grass mowed. His father went outside to find him. He walked all around the trailer until he saw the skirting underneath torn open. Now his father was really pissed. "Get your lazy ass out of there, boy. I told you to get that grass cut, and what did you do all day? Sit on your ass?" "No, Daddy, no. Don't hurt me, please." His father finally got a hold of his arm and struck him 3 times with the belt. He then kicked him square in the ass twice and then struck him in the face with his fist. Jeb lay there, bloody and scared. He would have no more of this, not ever again. This shit was going to stop right now. Jeb raised up to his knees as his father raised up to swing the belt at him one more time. Jeb crawled to his feet, his hunting knife he always carried in his jeans clenched tightly in his fist. He swung it toward his father's stomach. It plunged deep into his father's gut. The look of surprise and shock on his father's face did not move Jeb as he removed the knife and crimson red blood oozed from his father's stomach. For some reason, Jeb was not able to stop himself. His humiliation and rage left over from the beating he had just received drove him to plunge the knife again into the chest of his father. Again, then again, each time with more force as Jeb's rage gave him superior strength he did not know he possessed. His father finally succumbed to the vicious attack and lay flat on his back, looking up at the sky. He lay motionless, his eyes empty and hollow, lifeless. His mother ran to stop him.
Jeb, stop! Stop, please!
Jeb held the knife, dripping with his father's blood, and stood still like a statue. Jeb's breathing was fast and labored. His mother slowly removed the knife from his hand.
Run, Jeb. Run as fast as you can and never come back. It's the only way for you to survive. Run, Jeb!
His mother held the knife and watched Jeb run away.
My boy. My beautiful boy. It's the only way.
She thought within, as she laid plans to bury her husband's body in the woods. She would tell anyone asking about Jeb's father that he up and left the family and that Jeb ran away. Jeb was officially a missing person, but they would never find him. He would evade everyone. He would learn how to survive. It was now 2 years since Jeb killed his father. Jeb grew in size and was now more like a man than a boy. He still defended and protected Loretta, the one he loved with all his heart, just like he loved his mother. But he taught her that revenge against all that was evil to them was actually the right way to think about life. He would tell her, how were we supposed to end all the evil, especially the things that happened to kids like us? The cops? Family services? What do they do to stop that cruelty, the verbal and physical abuse, and them not caring none for us as kids? Loretta would listen to Jeb and thought him to be the smartest man in the world. They found the trailer they now lived in empty and abandoned. It was just like the others they discovered before on their travels. None of them seemed owned by anyone, and the trailers were always empty. They would steal things, furniture, lamps, anything to help them make their trailer seem nice. They put plastic in the windows to keep their trailer warm in the winter and stole fans to cool them in the summer. They moved from one to another as people ran them off or called the police to have them removed. They always seemed to stay one step ahead of the law. Loretta and Jeb always seemed to get away as Jeb would hear his mother's voice.
Run, Jeb. Run as fast as you can.
Loretta always marveled at how good Jeb was at staying hidden and not being found. He knew a lot about the woods and how to hide in them. He owned knives to ward off critters and to clean food for them to eat. Jeb came along and saved her from evil, and he was teaching her how to do the same for others. One day, they sat outside the trailer on a couch they got from the Christian Center and were talking. Loretta was mesmerized by his voice and what she figured was his wisdom. You see, Loretta, these damn people don't care about their kids. They only care about drinking that whiskey and yelling and screaming that they do at each other. Them poor little kids, they ain't got nothing to look forward to. They just like you and me. We's orphans, you know. So is them kids. They just don't know that yet, Jeb said.
But Jeb, it ain't right killing them people, is it? I mean, they ain't bothering us none.
Loretta, when you were little, did you want to leave that old place with those nasty folks?
Well, yes. I don't miss them people one bit. Not one.
You see then? It is righteous. We help them little ones that nobody cares for. Jeb and Loretta made the best of their homeless life, finding food in shelters, clothing at thrift shops, and any money they could steal from their victims. Those victims were not necessarily robbery victims. Oh no, they were actually victims of Jeb and Loretta's righteous behavior. Jeb always worried when he heard screams of pain and anger that someone was doing wrong. He felt he needed to help those suffering abuse. The abusers weren't victims at all to Jeb. They got what they damned well deserved. Just like his father. He would usually bury them in shallow graves, many never to be found, as he and Loretta would leave a trail of carnage behind them. Jeb never looked back at his trail of blood and vengeance. After all, he felt what he was doing was right. But Loretta asked the Aqua bird when she would see it if they were doing right or wrong. In the end, Loretta would always puff out her chest and say to herself,
That's me. I'm the pretty bird.
One night, they were out walking and they heard yelling and screaming from another trailer in the park they stayed in. 2 children came flying out through the door and were crying. Jeb told them both to run far away. He pulled 2 knives from his jacket and gave one of the knives to Loretta. This was okay, Loretta thought. We are just puffing out our chests, just like the Aqua bird. She looked at Jeb with her green eyes and said,
You always told me it was okay if it was for a righteous reason.
Loretta then looked at the tree near the trailer where the kids ran from. The black and gray feathered mockingbird nodded its head at Loretta, giving her the signal to go ahead. She angered at the sight of that ugly bird, and she began to become that second person, the one with no memory. She felt the rage rise and build inside until she could no longer hold back the impending explosion. She spun quickly towards Jeb, her eyes meeting his eyes, and he just nodded his head in the affirmative as they walked inside the trailer. A bloody fury ensued. Loretta did things to the kid's mother she never thought possible before. She attacked the man holding the gun and slashed his throat from ear to ear, sending fountains of blood into the air. Filled with a dark, furious wrath, her hands and face quickly became bloodied as her righteous anger unleashed. The 2 made the news that day and were quickly arrested for double homicide. She was tried for murder in the 1st degree, but found not guilty by reason of insanity. She was institutionalized and forever caught in the crazy dreams about those they killed. Over and over the dreams would come. doctors were never quite certain if she actually perceived the carnage she had committed. They placed straps around her, and Loretta fought and fought until the dreams subsided. The shot, the stabbings, the blood, the screams, they always came back. Chapter 2. The End. The gray-feathered mockingbird landed on a tree outside her window at the sanitarium. It sang a horrid tune. Loretta looked slowly over at the bird and sneered as sweat rolled down her cheeks and forehead, her hair completely soaking wet and smelling soured. It flew away. In its place, the Aqua mockingbird sat perched, echoing a much sweeter tune. The tune was righteous. Loretta's mouth transformed into a wide smile. The straps no longer hurt, and her breathing began to slow down. Each time a new episode took place, the gray bird appeared. She would stab at the bird with her hand in violent strokes. The ugly bird would leave, and the pretty bird would appear in its place. Loretta would then puff out her chest.
That's me,
She said aloud to herself.
I'm the pretty bird. Righteousness. I miss you, Jeb.
Jeb died 30 years earlier at the ripe age of 22 inside a trailer. Such a hard life he had lived in such a short time. No one ever told Loretta, not that her feeble, broken mind would have understood. She knew he was hurt by the gunshot, but she never knew he would die. She could only remember small bits and pieces of what happened that day. The gray-feathered mockingbird filled her with enough rage to explode. Loretta thought she would see Jeb soon. It was not to be. She lost all track of time with no sense of how old she was now. At 52 years old, for the past 32 years, Loretta saw the two birds at least once every single day. Each day, she shooed the gray bird away, and whenever she saw the Aqua bird, she would then puff out her chest and relax enough to sleep. Jeb would watch her from his perch on the redbud tree, just out of reach, outside her window. His feathers are gray and dull. The ugly bird. He did not understand why she wanted to shoo him away. He was so good to her. He had shown her how to show mercy to the unwanted children and judgment to the nasty, neglectful parents. One day, the gray bird flew away and never came back. Loretta passed that day at the age of 54. She died from an epileptic seizure. The gray bird could no longer see her, and her empty chair reminded him of what he had lost. His reason for coming was gone. Loretta's dreams of blood, violence, stabbing, and cutting had ended. But the Aqua bird, well, it left too. But a new one came back. It landed and perched back on the same redbud that had now grown and matured to a quite large tree. The mockingbird always came back every day of every year and watched over whoever was in that room sitting in that familiar chair in the sanitarium. It was the pretty bird's job. The patients had never had anyone else to watch over them, and now it was Loretta's turn to do for them what another pretty bird had done for her. That job was to shine that strange and mysterious light upon their face during their times of misery, so that they too could puff out their chests and say,
That's me. I'm the pretty bird.
The Candyman can, 'cause he mixes it with love and makes the world taste good. Willy Wonka. Every town has its ghost stories. Maybe it's the haunted house on the other side of the railroad tracks, with a spirit that haunts the tunnel in the woods. But people love talking about things that go bump in the night, and the places that they lurk. My favorite, though, have always been stories based in truth. And I don't mean the true stories your friends tell you happened to a cousin of theirs, or the ones your drunk uncle tells you around the campfire. I'm talking about real stories. The ones you can verify through newspaper articles, police reports, and from people who were actually there. Maybe it's the academic in me, but I've always thought that those are the scariest. Those are the ones that become legend. Ever since I was a little boy, I knew that I wanted to be in one of those stories. Actually, it might be more accurate to say that I always wanted to be the story. After the things I've done tonight, people will be saying my name for years to come. Tonight, on Halloween night, I will become immortal. Before I get to the good parts, it might be useful to talk a little bit about myself. The real me, as they say. When this is all over and I am long dead, I know the real me will get lost in the story. The human I am will be replaced by a monster. A monster that people will remember. It's not all bad and not completely unexpected, but still, I'd like to be remembered at least somewhat accurately. Maybe this is why I'm doing this. I'm not sure, but I'll get to that later. I am a chemist by trade. It's not always an exciting job, but it paid me well enough to afford a comfortable life and interested me enough to avoid becoming a zombie. I like to make art, though I wouldn't call myself an artist. I do a little bit of everything, I guess. I paint, do some sketches, some drawings. A couple people told me I was pretty good, but I was never confident enough to make a real go at it. I have no wife or children, and I've never been married. I've had girlfriends from time to time, but things just didn't work out. It's not that big a deal. I can afford sex whenever I want it, and I don't have to worry about other people moving my things around. It wasn't bad to have a woman's touch around my house, but it always ends with them wanting to change things or throw my stuff away, and I don't like change. I like predictability. I like organization. I like science. I consider chemistry the purest of the sciences for a couple of reasons. It's a perfect marriage of mathematical abstraction and real-world practicality. It is, by its very nature, proactive. Sure, there's an element of discovery and reverse engineering, but I've been more interested in how to make shit happen. If I mix a little bit of this and add a little of that, then we get this. Every time. If I want a different effect, I simply substitute this for that, alter the conditions a little bit and a pinch of whatever, and voila, we get this. This part is important, actually. Not everything I mentioned is, I guess, but this is my story, and I get to say whatever I want. Now let's go back to Halloween for a minute. Some of the reasons I love it so much are likely obvious at this point, but maybe some others are not. I like dressing up in costumes, and though I'm not a huge fan of being around large groups of people, I love seeing others in costume as well. People can get really creative when they're not at each other's throats, and some of the women are really hot. Some people complain about how lots of women don't dress up so much as a character, but rather a sexy whatever, be it a cat, a nurse, a witch, always a sexy that. Doesn't bother me. I think it's great. A bigger reason I like Halloween is the feel of it. I've always been a northeasterner, so the crispness of fall and the changing of the leaves play a role in it. The air smells different. People start having campfire gatherings and telling scary stories, and I love the idea of that. One night out of the year, the veil between our world and the ones beyond becomes so thin. Things can come and go. The mystery, the unknown, the anticipation. What's not to love? Trick-or-treating, while it used to be my favorite part of Halloween, is now only the most important part to me. You've probably guessed it by now, but that's the brush I use to make my life's masterpiece. The children who came to my house and took my treats will be the paint. Halloween will be my canvas. This all sounds new, as if it's something I'm just enacting now. In actuality, I've been planning for this day for a very, very long time. In a practical sense, I started 3 years ago when I lived in Newburyport, Massachusetts. I started small. At first, I simply injected a concentrated dose of magnesium hydroxide into Tootsie Rolls. For those out there who aren't chemists, this is the active ingredient in milk of magnesia. It is a laxative. And boy, oh boy, it's a powerful one. I've used it before for pranks and the like, but this was definitely on a larger scale. The mental image of an entire neighborhood full of kids and parents shitting themselves up and down and sideways, it still makes me laugh my ass off. All in all, it was a pretty safe start. Things like this basically present as a stomach bug, and it would be a very strange thing for a doctor to test for it. Eat some crackers, drink some ginger ale, just wait for the waterworks to stop. Last year, I went a lot further. I was nervous, but if I ever was going to make the big leap, I knew I'd have to push the envelope. I could just tell you the what here, but I really want to tell you the how. I'm especially proud of it, and I want it to be a part of my legend even if it didn't go exactly to plan. The main ingredient, and the hardest to obtain, was codeine. I bought tablets from coworkers, underwent some unnecessary dental procedures, had an accidental fall or two, and before I knew it, I had a respectable supply. Next, I needed some iodine and red phosphorus, both easily obtainable without drawing suspicion. I picked up some paint thinner from the local hardware shop, some gas from the gas station, and managed to steal some hydrochloric acid from work. I'll spare you the full equation, but if you've seen Breaking Bad, you have an idea of what the process was like. The end result was a very light, super concentrated, and very foul-smelling powder. It was my take on a fringe designer drug I heard about on the internet one time, a semi-synthetic opioid called Crocodile. I knew that it was going to pack one hell of a punch, but how could I get people to eat it? After a lot of consideration, I settled on black licorice. The stuff is absolutely putrid, but the taste is overpowering, and somehow, people actually like it. Plus, the idea of a deadly black candy is just so fucking perfect I could die. I was confident that I could mask the smell long enough to get it to the subject's mouth. I just needed to get them to swallow. I added a trace of wax to the heated compound, added concentrated licorice extract, and cut the strips into small, bite-sized squares. YouTube helped me throw together a couple other contrasting flavors: lemon, lime, orange, cherry. I cut them into tiny squares too, threw them into wrapped little packages, and called it a day. I hoped the sweet, citrusy flavors would offset the black ones enough to do the trick. It turns out I was mostly correct. The hardest part of that year was trying to find ways to distribute the candy to various locations to avoid any easily identifiable central source. I'm not going to make it easier on anyone who reads this and let you know how I did it, but I'll tell you this for nothing. It was a monumental pain in the ass. My skills are in science, not logistics, and that Halloween was an hours-long demonstration of the fact. However, I was able to fudge it enough to relax a little and enjoy the evening. I sat up all night listening to the news and passing out real Halloween candy to the kids in my neighborhood. I decided to dress up like a spooky chef, which I still think is hilarious. And I spent most of the night pacing around in nervous anticipation. News started trickling in around 10 p.m., and began to heat up throughout the night and peaked nicely the next afternoon. You can read about it in the Newburyport News front page 11/2/18. The article is called "The Newburyport Nightmare. Crocodile-laced Halloween candy sends town into panic." Oh, it's a cool title, but all in all, I consider it a total failure in every way but one. At least I wasn't caught. In the end, 13 people were sent to the hospital, varying in age from 6 to 17. In retrospect, the main problem was that I concentrated the powder too much, and the effects of eating the candy were pretty much instant. The subject would ingest it, start power vomiting immediately, thereby releasing the odor and deterring further consumption, and the intoxicating effects happened right after that. One kid got into serious condition once as the caustic nature of the compound nearly destroyed her esophagus completely. But sadly, she survived. Other than that, there were a couple of skin lesions, 3 cases of skin deterioration and scarring, a bunch of people getting super high unexpectedly, and a big cloud of disappointment. It caused some panic and alarm, but it was definitely not what I envisioned. Needless to say, it pissed me off. Although I wasn't caught, I was considered a person of interest for a time. However, having no criminal record, no history of mental health problems, and rehearsing for just such a possibility all came in pretty handy. So, I never had to sweat too much. At this point, though, it was obvious that I had to leave town once the coast cleared. No legends are written about a man who made the kids and parents of Rupert A. Knock Middle School shit themselves or projectile vomit, but I couldn't achieve my dream here. I needed bigger, and now I had a taste for it. In a move that was just of throwing a dart at the eastern seaboard, I found myself in Baltimore, Maryland. Even though I am a scientist, I've always had a poet's weakness for symbols. Baltimore. Drugs. A city in decay. Edgar Allan Poe. Oh, I don't know. I thought it was cool. His stories were always my favorite, and that's where he wrote most of them. Maybe this is where I was meant to write mine too. This brings me to today. My magnum opus. My life's work. My masterpiece. Once I'd settled on the primary ingredient, the rest of the plan just fell right into place, almost like it was destined to happen. This time, the active ingredient was methylene dioxypyrovalerone. It's a cool word to say, a bear to spell, but more importantly, just so happens to be the active ingredient in what's commonly known as bath salts. Due to the limitless beauty of the internet, I was able to stockpile the stuff bit by bit throughout the year. Then, I purchased a shit ton of bite-sized pretzels, melted down a mix of rich chocolate, dark fudge, a little bit of caramel, while saving some to drizzle on top, then put my artistic skills to use. The sweetness of the chocolate and the saltiness of the pretzels were more than enough to mask the bitter taste of the salts. I coated the pretzels in the chocolate mixture, drizzled them with caramel, and when they solidified, packaged them in adorable little Halloween wrappers. It's funny, but I've actually gotten kind of good at this candy-making thing. Rachel Ray would be proud. So here we are. It's now 1:30 a.m., October 31st, 2019. My pretzel bags have been dispersed from my common, nondescript suburban house on my nondescript suburban street in boring old suburban Baltimore. I had a good number of trick-or-treaters, I'd say 60 or 70 at least. And now, I just wait. Oh, I can hardly sit still. My heart is pounding and I can't catch my breath. There's no chance I get out of this alive. I know what I'm going to have to do. I just don't know how to do it. I guess I hoped writing this down would make me come up with something. I have some ideas, but I really can't fuck this up. I'm so scared. Oh, it's way too late for second guessing. I know the first thing people are going to ask when this all comes out is why? Why would anyone do such a thing? I can't say that I know for sure. Science teaches you a lot of things. One of the main things it teaches you is the absolute insignificance of the human being. When you're able to glimpse the larger design of math and the sciences, the hidden codes of the cosmos, the little ant trails we walk are shown for what they are. Shakespeare called them brief candles, and that we all strut and fret our hours about the stage, then are heard from no more. I don't want to be lost to history. I want to be remembered. If one is remembered, they never truly die. This is as close to a reason as I can muster right now. I honestly can't think. Think of it. Once this comes out, it will be the panic of a lifetime. Parents everywhere will fear for their children, and trick-or-treating will take on the spirit it was meant to have in the beginning. There's been far too much treat. It was high time for a trick. I am confident that I've done an admirable job in that regard. I've said about all there is to say on the subject. I hope that those who read this will tell my story over a family campfire, or as an excuse to test your kid's candy after a nice trick-or-treating haul. For now, I'm going to tuck this letter away, drink until I can't see straight, and watch the local news. I do hope I make it long enough to see some action. So, in conclusion, I simply want to wish the reader a very scary Halloween, and to remind them to never, ever take candy from a stranger, even one that you think you know. And so, goodbye. Postscript. Excerpts from The Baltimore Sun Halloween Massacre in Tarrytown, 11/1/2019. The city of Baltimore was rocked to its core this Halloween as a rash of drug-infused candy was discovered in the quiet suburb of Tarrytown. The candy, which appeared to be homemade, was distributed to trick-or-treaters, then ingested by several in the neighborhood. The effects were catastrophic. At the time of this writing, reports are that there were at least 7 dead, 15 wounded, and that the numbers are still climbing. Forensic analysis shows that the drug in question is what's commonly known on the street as bath salts. Once ingested, the subject experiences such effects as paranoia, delusions, extreme agitation, and psychosis. The effects are similar in both children and adults, and led to a series of deadly incidents throughout the night. 12-year-old Sally Walker stabbed her 8-year-old brother Ethan Walker in the head 12 times, killing him instantly before attacking his infant sister. After lacerating the baby across the mouth with a steak knife, she proceeded to bite the child's nose and lips, eating chunks of flesh from her face. When her father Robert heard the commotion, he attempted to intervene. Sally turned and stabbed him in the stomach before he was finally able to subdue the child. The father is in critical condition, and the child is in custody at the local psychiatric facility. Later in the article, Damon Medbury, a 9th grader at Newburyport High School, was trick-or-treating with his friends when he inexplicably started scratching at the skin on his face. According to a witness, his scratching became more frantic and forceful as the child emitted shrieks of anger. By the time police arrived at the scene, the child's face was covered in blood, and one of his eyes was pulled free from the socket, dangling from the optic nerve. The boy remains in critical condition at Anna Jacques Hospital, and doctors are not confident that he will ever see again. Still later, Megan Ruiz, a single mother of 3, was having a Halloween party in her room when, inexplicably, she grabbed young Dylan Martin, 4, into the kitchen, pushing him into the oven with a batch of sugar cookies. Though attempts were made to subdue her, by the time the boy was released, he had 3rd-degree burns on nearly every part of his body. He was later pronounced dead at the hospital. This rash of tragic events has been traced to homemade Halloween candy, Police Chief Maynard Avery says. He urges citizens of Baltimore to avoid any and all sweets gathered on Halloween night, while he reports that not all candy in the city is tainted, but that the risks are simply too large to take a chance. We have a couple of leads in the case, Avery said as he left the podium, "and we will catch the perpetrator, if it's the last thing I do." Postscript. The Black Candy Killer found. The Baltimore Sun, November 3rd, 2019. Police have reported that the perpetrator behind the Black Candy Massacre has been identified as Robert F. Bullock, a 43-year-old chemist from upstate New York. The subject was found dead by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Inside, officers reported a scene only imaginable in a horror movie. "It was terrible," said Sergeant Maynard Avery of the Baltimore PD. "In 30 years of service, I've never seen anything like it." Police discovered an elaborate chemistry lab, a warehouse, full of dangerous ingredients and even something more disturbing. Investigators say that the perpetrator was wearing an elaborately crafted, scary chef costume, and a note was placed beneath Bullock's bleeding head. When the police moved the body, they saw that the bloody sign read, "Bon Appetit." "While we were investigating the scene, we heard a strange ticking from under the floor," he said. Avery went on to say, "I remember reading some story like this once and we thought we'd check around. Reports indicate that an old tin heart-shaped box was found beneath the floorboards. We are told that among the items inside were a bunch of newspaper clippings and a sort of manifesto, seemingly written by Bullock himself. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he did something like this," Avery said. No information was given regarding the contents of the manifesto, as officials stated they contained sensitive information regarding the incident, and possibly other incidents besides. When asked about what the citizens should expect in the next couple of days, Avery offered some advice. "The best thing folks can do now," he says, "is to look through your kids' candy before you let them eat it. I mean, really, look at it. Smell it. It might be the only chance they got."
Mike Gilbert paused before driving under the deer skull. Carved vines twisted along the arch at the entrance to Undergrove Salvage, with the bone-white skull centered at the top. He flicked a cigarette butt onto the road, then stepped on the gas. His Ford F-150 rumbled through the gate, following the sparks that left a trail of orange light like a fallen star. A black and white tattoo of a phoenix covered Mike's right arm. He had just turned 26 2 weeks back, but his beard stubble was already spotted with gray. Most of his years had been hard ones. Beside him, in the passenger seat, Mike's younger brother Randy stared wide-eyed out the window. Despite the circumstances that brought them here, they weren't bad people. Sure, Mike sold a little weed, slipped dollars out of the till at the bar, and dropped off a car or two here at the salvage without asking about the title. But this was something else. All that shit before, no one had died. He drove through the junkyard toward the squat concrete block building that housed the office. Moonlight cast the rows of wrecked vehicles in cold gray light as they passed between them. Mike cut off the engine and climbed from the cab. His brother limped after him. Randy's left foot turned inward, dragging and stirring up the stink of dust and used motor oil, almost overpowering the smell of East Texas pines. Despite the balmy summer heat, goosebumps raised along Mike's arms. Together, they waited, watching the metal door of the office. Randy blew out a breath and shivered.
Someone stepped on my grave.
Jesus Christ. Mike rubbed his arms and spun around, peering into the dark. That shit sounds like something Nana would say. You're not buried yet, and if you were, you wouldn't know if a whole congregation tromped across the dirt.
This place is fucking spooky.
Randy wrapped his arms in a hug across his chest.
Why we gotta come out here at night?
We're here at night because we don't have a choice. Sal Undergrove had agreed to meet with them, but only if they came by after hours. "I'm sorry, Mac." Randy tucked his hands under his arms and rocked back and forth. He wore a faded red t-shirt with his favorite cartoon character Bugs Bunny printed on the front. Thin strands of blonde hair fell over his eyes, almost covering the jagged white scar on his forehead. In the dark, he looked closer to 12 than 22. Mike waved away the apology. "Remember what we talked about? You keep quiet, you hear?" He gripped his brother's shoulder and gave him a reassuring pat. Randy nodded. "Uh-huh, I remember." If Sal Undergrove wouldn't help, Mike guessed the first thing tomorrow morning he'd drive the truck to Mexico and dump it there. That would fix part of the problem, but wouldn't do anything about the nightmares. He fell into a dreamless stupor after a six-pack and a couple shots of Jack, but Randy woke up every night, tangled in bedsheets that clutched like ghosts, bent on vengeance. Mike would give anything to go back in time to before that night. How far would be enough? How many poor decisions would he erase? To the start of that evening before they even left the house and went to the bar? Or would going back to before that fourth or fifth round of drinks would work? This whole thing was his fault, and like always, he'd be the one to fix it. Mike bounced the truck keys in his hand, Wade climbing in and driving off. Forget dealing with Sal. He tapped the cash-filled envelope tucked in his pocket, reassuring himself it was still there. Wind rattled through the stacks of mangled metal next to the car crusher. The office door creaked open, and footsteps crunched toward them over the gravel drive. Sal approached, lighting his path with a heavy flashlight. Mike raised his arm to block the glare. "Hey, you mind turning that thing off?" "Just checking." Sal strolled over to Mike's side of the truck, playing the light across the Ford as he went. A black knit cap covering most of his frizzy gray hair. The hand that gripped the door panel ended in thick yellowed fingernails. "That's some heavy damage you got there, boys." Mike flinched, resisting the urge to babble out an explanation. If Sal figured out the truth, it might not even matter. The man had a reputation for making stuff disappear, mostly cars through the chop shop, but there were rumors of other things. Rumors that Sal could erase not only the physical evidence of something, but he could even take away the memories of anything you wanted gone, forever. How nice that would be. If this worked out, maybe they would come back and get rid of a whole basket of bad shit. Like when their old man used to come home drunk and pissed, and they had to hide or risk a beating. Mike glanced at his brother, remembering. How would things have been different if only? They couldn't go back in time, though. If he met up with his dear dad as an adult, he'd beat him like a bad habit, but the bastard had been rotting in his grave for 16 years. As Sal circled the truck, Mike followed, motioning Randy to do the same. While Sal inspected the truck's grill, Mike held his breath, hoping he'd washed away all the blood. "We hit a deer," Randy said. He clapped a hand over his mouth and slipped behind Mike. Sal whistled. "Front bumper, quarter panel, headlamp." He clicked off his flashlight. "There must have been a hell of a deer. Question is, why bring it here? This truck been involved in something I should know about? Can't have the cops sniffing around." Mike scuffed a foot in the gravel. "Gotta pay cash, and I thought you might give us a break. Old time's sake, you know." "Old times is right. What's it been, over a year since you brought me anything?" "We were out of town, working the rigs." Mike ducked his head, grateful for the dark, glad Sal didn't see the nervous tick at the corner of his eye. Randy had wandered over to the car crusher. He stared up at the top of the tower of flattened cars next to it.
"Mike, there's a red Mustang.
like you used to have. This one's a pancake, though. Get the hell back over here. Heat rose in Mike's face as he turned to Sal. Christ almighty if they didn't get out of here before a car fell on Randy. Look, can you fix it or not? Sal spread one large hand across the hood of the truck. He bent close to the grill and tilted his head as though listening for something. I might take the Ford off your hand. Cash money right now. Truck's only 2 years old. I still owe him the loan. Mike stuffed his hands in his pockets. I want everything back the way it was, before the accident. Mike paused. If he said the next part out loud, there would be no going back. He was desperate enough to believe in black magic, voodoo, wizards, hell, anything if it would take away the guilt from that night. Mike lowered his voice and leaned closer to the older man. I heard you could erase things like it never happened. That's what I want. Whatever it costs, I'll pay it. Sal hawked and spit on the ground. You got yourself into a mess, haven't you? A truck, now that I can fix. I might help you with the other, but there's always something left on the scale. And you gotta square that debt yourself. Sal's eyes glinted yellow, like a cat's. What's dead is dead. No bringing that back. But the recollection of it... Sal paused, staring at Mike. At last he nodded. All right, let's go inside. He waved toward the office with his light. Hesitating, Mike waited for Randy to catch up. Something about the way the wrecked cars looked at night, as though each one carried the memory of whatever mishap had fallen on them, gave Mike chills. Heading to Sal's office, where they'd be alone with the man, didn't make him feel any better. A tired window unit air conditioner rattled and wheezed musty air inside the concrete building. Sal left them standing next to a battered wooden desk as he slipped through the opening at the back of the space, into a strange area where grease-stained car parts hung from hooks on the walls. You wait here, Mike told Randy, before following Sal. Metal shelves sagging with repair manuals circled the room. Scattered among the dusty books were dozens of bell jars, the curved glass reflecting the light, concealing their contents until Mike stood close enough for his breath to fog the surface. Each jar held moss, twigs, and stone chips, arranged like scenes from the fairy tales their grandmother used to read to them. The old stories, where starving children wandered lost in the woods, and maidens had their hearts cut out by jealous witches. Dried butterflies with tattered wings clung like fairies to miniature branches. Tossed within the greenery of one were the delicate yellowed bones of a small animal. You like my little collection? Sal's voice startled him, and Mike jumped back from the display. Well, it's interesting, that's for sure, Mike said. He glanced at the shelves and, without thinking, crossed himself. If Nana were here, she'd probably lay down a salt circle before the whole weird mess. Cool! Randy shuffled into the room and reached toward a jar. Sal grabbed his hand, drawing it back. Careful! Those old ones are delicate. Sal lifted a jar from one of the higher shelves and dusted off the cover before handing it to Randy. Here's a good one. Mike protested, afraid his brother might drop the damn thing. Inside the bell jar, a tiny red car rested upside down next to a stone bridge fashioned from pebbles. A metal tag fastened on the wooden base had the words Memento Mori engraved across the front. Is this supposed to be that Mustang out there? The one Randy said looked like my old car? Mike took the jar from Randy as it began vibrating in his hands. A faint noise, a high-pitched scream, sounded from the jar. Randy clapped his hands over his ears. Mike thrust the glass back at Sal. Jesus, what the fuck was that? He shook his shoulders at the ominous feeling that ran down his back, like a ghost running their fingers across his spine. Like Randy had said earlier, like someone had stepped on his grave. Grinning, Sal took the jar from Mike. Don't get your tits in a twist. This ain't yours. Not anywhere close, is it? The folks who gave that one paid dearly. Smiling, Sal caressed the glass, then set it back where it belonged. After, he rummaged in a pile of folders and crumpled papers crammed on top of a rusty metal filing cabinet. Here it is. Sal held up a receipt book, and they followed him back into the main office area. Sal stopped at the desk, bending to fill one of the boxes on the form. Finished, he swiveled the book to Mike for his signature, and afterwards he closed the book and dropped it into a drawer. You bring the cash? Yeah, $2,000, what you told me. Mike set the money in front of Sal. And does that cover everything? No, that's your down payment. Sal picked up the bills. It takes care of the truck. You'll settle up the rest after. What choice did he have? Mike nodded and dropped the truck key into Sal's palm. Two weeks later, Sal called. Got it fixed up for you. Good as new. You can pick it up tonight after 10. It was closer to midnight by the time the brothers got a ride to the salvage yard. Mike begged a ride from Justine, one of the waitresses at the bar. They had to wait until after her shift. And when they got to the salvage yard, Justine refused to drive through the gate.
No way, dude. That's some creepy-ass voodoo shit.
She pointed at the deer skull hanging over the center of the entrance.
This is the kind of place you drive in, you might not make it out. Y'all can walk from here.
She stopped her car in the road and left the motor running while Mike and Randy climbed out. The brothers trudged through the maze of wrecks to the junkyard's office. As they approached, the door swung open. Sal stood there, outlined in the yellow light. Parked at the side of the building was Mike's truck. The Ford's pearl-white finish gleamed in the moonlight. Showroom perfect, like Sal had promised, good as new.
Look, Mike, it's all fixed.
Randy danced an awkward loop around the Ford. Mike smiled, watching his brother. Sal hadn't mentioned the cost for the rest, the forgetting. Maybe Mike thought they would do without it, save the money. It had been a month already, and no cops were snooping around. That had been his biggest worry. What would Randy have said to them? It was an accident, but how could they explain it? With the truck repaired, all evidence gone, they might finally move on. You couldn't change the past. You could only do your best to forget it. Glad to see you made it, Sal called out.
We had to find a ride. It took...
Randy started before Sal interrupted.
No time for chit-chat. We got things to settle.
He motioned them into the office. Inside, the weak fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, setting Mike's teeth on edge. Sal took the Ford's keys from a rack behind his desk. He set them down beside a basketball-sized object hidden under black cloth. Mike reached to pick up the keys, but Sal grasped his wrist.
Just a minute,
he said.
Things got a little complicated when we did the repairs. We found blood crusted on the rocker panel. You still saying that was a deer you hit?
Yeah, came out of nowhere. Mike peered at the dusty floor. Anything to keep from meeting Sal's gaze. He tried to change the conversation. It sure looks good now, like nothing happened.
That was my promise, wasn't it?
Sal rested his hand on the black cloth.
Now for the second part.
Sal whisked the covering away, revealing a glass dome. Inside the bell jar was a miniature scene. A toy-sized white truck on a gray ribbon of clay, meant to represent a road. Bits of straw sprang up from the roadside and tiny green pine trees leaned toward the truck.
What the fuck?
Randy gasped as Mike spotted a tiny figure tucked into the grass-filled ditch beside the road.
No, goddammit!
Mike snatched up the cloth and dropped it over the jar.
What the hell is this supposed to be? This is supposed to make us forget what happened? I didn't want this.
He waved at the cloth.
I don't want anything to do with that.
Sal took out the receipt book and flipped the pages to the one Mike had signed.
It's right here. You signed a contract. One memento for...
Mike interrupted.
I'm not paying for that. We never discussed this. You didn't tell me what I was signing.
For a moment, Sal's gaze darkened.
I didn't think you were one to argue the cost of things.
He lowered his eyebrows and frowned. With a shake of his head, he pasted on a smile.
You don't want the memory?
He patted the jar.
But I do. I'll keep it here for you, safe and sound. Remember, our deal isn't finished until it's time for the last payment. Whatever.
Mike scooped up the keys to the Ford.
We're leaving. I paid you already for the repairs, fair and square.
He waved a hand at the jar.
You can keep that, whatever it's supposed to be.
As they hustled to the Ford, Mike thought about handing the keys to Randy. Let him have the first drive in the repaired truck. But looking at his brother's pale face, he reconsidered. It would take some time to exorcise all the ghosts, purge those horrible memories. At first, after they left the junkyard, they traveled down the familiar smooth blacktop of the county road. By the third turn, however, the route turned to a rough hardpan covered in crushed rock. Pine trees loomed along the narrow lane, their branches meeting overhead in spots, making a tunnel of the route. This wasn't the way home, but it looked familiar somehow. Mike tossed his phone to Randy.
See if you can get Google Maps to load. I don't know how the hell it happened, but I must have missed a turn somewhere.
The pale green glow of the dashboard lit Randy's face. He blew out a breath and dropped the phone into the truck's console, then gazed out the window.
No signal. Was that a pond? Did we pass a pond? Randy asked. It's pitch dark out. We wouldn't have seen a pond unless we drove straight into it.
Mike blew out a breath and accelerated, trying to put some more of the road behind them. The moon shone through a gap in the trees, revealing a weathered gray farmhouse. Had they passed that earlier? Randy's foot tapped a quick beat on the floorboard. Outside, the pines rushed past in a blur. Mike reached over and tapped his brother's leg.
It's okay.
Ahead, the road curved and disappeared into the black forest. Randy sat up, peering out the windshield.
No! Slow down!
Mike glanced from the road for only a second. When he looked up, a horned figure, draped in white and gray cloth, stood revealed in the headlights. Too late, he twisted the steering wheel. The truck passed through the figure like it was a cloud of dust. Mike stomped the brake.
What the hell?
He jerked against his seatbelt as they slid sideways. The Ford thumped and slid through the loose rock as it slowed and finally stopped. What was that? Randy clutched his arm, fingers digging into the muscle. Mike shook him off. An animal, probably. What else was outside this late at night? Better stay calm. Get the truck back on the road. Stay here. I'll check it out. Mike shut down the truck and turned on the flashers. He took a deep breath, counting to 10 before climbing out. The Ford rested at an angle across a narrow ditch, headlights barely piercing the black woods. He circled the truck to grab a flashlight from the glove box. Randy whimpered and pressed a hand to his mouth. Mike's knees shook as adrenaline flooded his body. Jesus, it happened so fast, like that other time. But now they hadn't even felt a bump. So what the hell had been in the road? He shone the light over the truck, looking for damage. Nothing. Not a dent. Not a scratch. Mike crept down the road, shining the light ahead. Tire marks dug into the gravel and led to a path of flattened weeds, as though something large had dragged itself there. Dark, wet blotches dotted the grass. A noise from behind him made Mike turn. Randy stood in front of the open passenger door. His blonde hair looked like a halo in the square of light spilling from the Ford's interior. "Mike, did you see it?" He drew a breath before answering. "There's nothing there. I'm going to check a little ways back." "Was it a dog? A deer?" Randy followed him. "It wasn't..." "Get back in the damn truck." As Mike reached for him, Randy flinched, twisting away. Mike walked him back to the truck and stood there until his brother climbed in and buckled his seatbelt. "I didn't do anything, Mike. Not this time." Randy folded his hands in his lap and stared out the windshield. His shoulders slumped like a wounded child. "Look, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have yelled at you. It's getting lost, that crazy shit at Sal's, the road, and now this accident." Mike waved a hand at the trees leaning over the road. "It's not like before. I promise you that." Except the more he thought about the place, the trees, the road, the farmhouse, the more it brought back that other memory. "It was an animal," Mike muttered. No way in hell would the same thing happen twice. His mind recalled the pale moon of a face frozen in the light right before the impact. No, this thing had two twisted horns sprouting from its head. A deer. Wouldn't a person have cried out? Holding up his light, he stepped closer to the edge of the road. Wind whispered through the trees. The scent of pine and damp leaves hung in the air, along with a hint of something foul, like meat gone bad. "Hello?" Mike held still, listening. A strangled half-groan, half-growl sounded. He froze. If he didn't look, he wouldn't know. But if they had hit someone, they couldn't just drive away. Not again. Stepping from the road, he kept clear of the damp trail that led toward the woods. About 10 yards in, a flattened circle lay swirled in the long grass. Whatever had rested there was gone. Nothing stirred in the beam from the flashlight. Silence fell, as though the woods held its breath. The tree trunks at the edge of the forest had strange symbols carved into their bark. Runes scratched into the pale inner wood. The hair rose on Mike's arms. He stumbled back as his foot landed on a dry branch with a snap loud as a shot. The flashlight's beam danced across the ground, lighting up an object half buried in the grass. Mike kicked it into the light. A child's red sneaker. "No, this can't be happening." Mike flung the shoe into the woods, then rushed back to the truck, his shoulders hunched as though he expected a blow to land across them any second. Mike ran onto the empty road, now covered in thick fog. No sign of the Ford. Had he gotten turned around in there? "Randy!" he called, and spun in the middle of the lane, listening. Suddenly, light blazed in the darkness. Headlights 100 yards ahead. The truck. Something or someone crouched in front below the Ford's bumper. He jogged toward them. 10 feet away from the truck, Mike froze. At last he saw what waited for him. He rubbed his eyes as though that would clear the vision. In front of the Ford, Sal Undergrove stood clutching the back of Randy's shirt. In his other hand, he balanced a glass jar with the recreated memory of the accident. Mike's brother knelt in the dirt, a crown of antlers on his head. Blood painted red streamers down his face. "No!" Mike stumbled toward Sal. "What are you doing?" "It's time to pay up." Sal lifted the jar. "The cost of guilt, the price of forgetting. An eye for an eye, a death for a death." For a moment, Mike considered knocking the glass jar from his hands. As though Sal knew his thoughts, he stepped back, hugging the glass to his chest. Fog swirled around his feet and wrapped the man in a gray cloak. Instead of flesh and blood, he clutched the jar with skeletal hands. His face melted away, revealing a skull with glowing yellow eyes. Horns sprouted from either side of the skull. The figure pointed a bony finger toward the road. Bent double, Mike pulled at his hair and screamed, "Let him go!" Randy crawled forward and wrapped his arms around Mike's legs. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, Mike." "It's not his fault," Mike pleaded with Sal. "I should have been the one driving, but I was too drunk that night." Sal's bony hand landed on Mike's shoulder. Impossibly, his voice boomed from the skull that had replaced his flesh and blood. "You made the decision, but your brother owes the debt. It must be paid. Guilt is like acid. It eats away until there's nothing left." Mike shook his head. The horrible scene replayed in his mind. The bar, drinking, then tossing Randy the keys. But if not Randy, then he would have been behind the wheel. Would he have seen the kid in time to stop? Probably not. "You just need a sacrifice, right?" Mike pulled Randy to his feet. "Can you make him forget all about it? About that night and this one?" Sal nodded. "He should follow the road to the curve. You stay, but your brother will find his way home once the payment is made." "Don't do it. I'll go to the cops. I'll tell them what happened." Randy clutched Mike's hand. "Too late for that. I have the memento mori, and it must be completed. Those were our terms." Mike lifted the deer antlers from Randy and placed them on his own head. The pines shook in the wind with a sound like 1,000 whispers. The words echoed with a child's laughter. Mike grabbed his brother's hand and pulled him into a hug. "You gotta go. Follow the road and don't look back, no matter what you hear." "I'm not gonna leave you. I don't want to forget you." Randy wiped his sleeve across his eyes. "Nana needs you." Mike pushed him away. "Take the truck and go on home now, and I'll be along later." The lie, he figured, was a small sin to add to his guilt. But if it made Randy leave so he'd be safe, then Mike would tell 1,000 lies. Randy climbed into the truck and it inched forward. gradually picking up speed as it pulled away from Mike. He watched until the taillights faded into the darkness, then stumbled back toward the place marked with tire tracks and crushed weeds. Mike turned around as the growl of a large motor approached. It burst from the fog. Not a white truck like his Ford, but a truck from hell, midnight black, 10 feet tall with a chrome grille that grinned with metal teeth. No one was behind the wheel. Caught in the blazing light, Mike spread his hands and closed his eyes. He hoped it would be quick. Right before the end, cold fingers traced down his back, like someone stepping on his grave.
Chilling tales for dark nights.